Can you guys see the presentation?
Yep,
And you're seeing the Lewis&Clarke presentation?
yes, we are.
All right,
It's
I am
really-
having,
Yes, it's not in presentation mode, but we can see the slides.
no, I'm having a slight issue with presentation mode tonight, so we're gonna probably have to do it this way.
I'm going to address the subject of what was the Corps of Discovery. I'm going to speak briefly about the existing Lewis and Clark stamps in the United States. I'm going to answer the question, who is Fred Collins? Because that's the basis of this collection. I'm going to explain why this collection is a tribute to a close friend of mine. And finally, I'm going to show off some covers from the collection.
Sorry, just give me a minute.
Corps of Discovery is another name for the Lewis and Clark expedition itself, which was 1804 to 1806. It was an Army military expedition. The official name was the Corps Volunteers on an Expedition of Northwestern Discovery. The shorthand term is Corps of Discovery. It was led by Meriwether Lewis, who was President Jefferson's personal secretary. He was 26 years old when he became Jefferson's secretary, and he was 29 years old when he led the expedition. His co-captain was William Clark, 33 when he was participating in the expedition. And Clark at one time was Lewis's superior, but they became close friends, and Lewis called on Clark, and Clark gladly accepted the role of co-captain. About 40 men in all departed St. Louis in May of 1804. They actually left from St. Charles, which is a short distance upstream on the Missouri River from St. Louis. Go ahead, Todd. It had basically 4 elements to the expedition's mission. One was to explore the Louisiana Purchase. That was when the U.S. bought from France for $15 million, 830 square miles of territory, shown in white there, called Louisiana by the French. That's roughly a plot of land, a square plot of land, 900 plus miles on the side. Jefferson had the further goal. He wanted to claim the entire West for the United States. He had that in the back of his mind for many years. The Spanish were all in the Southwest. The Russians were playing up in Northwest, and other countries were exploring the Pacific. Jefferson wanted to stake his claim to the entire continent. And he felt that commerce was the way to do that, and that one of the goals of the expedition was to persuade the Indian tribes to become trading partners. Jefferson envisioned that the U.S. could purchase thousands of beaver pelts from the Indians, and that would be a basis for commerce, and then it could grow from there. And finally, at this time, they thought there might be a water route from the Mississippi up the Missouri and to the Pacific Ocean. It turns out there isn't, but they had hoped to find one. Go ahead, Tom. Their pathway is shown here. They left St. Charles, went up the Missouri River. They're going upstream. So you'll see their boat in a minute, but basically they could sail if the wind was right. It usually wasn't. So they pulled the boats upriver, and they pulled them from the bank as well. That's how they made it all the way to the Pacific. Go ahead, next one. Here are the stamps, Lewis and Clark stamps that we produced in the United States. First one was in 1954, 150th anniversary, the 3-cent stamp shown there. The next 3 were produced simultaneously in 2004 for the 200th anniversary. The one on the right, about 3854, came in a sheet of 20. And the other two, with both Lewis and Clark, came in a wonderful booklet, 20 stamps, 2 sheets of 10 stamps each, and a wonderful recounting of the expedition. I have extras of these we can talk about at the end if anyone wants to get one. So we have those 4 stamps, and then go ahead to the next slide. And there are 2 more which are relevant. One is the Sacagawea stamp. You recall that Sacagawea was the Indian woman who became part of the expedition when the expedition wintered in South Dakota. And she was the child bride, I think she was 15 years old at the time, of a French trapper and explorer, Charbonneau, and they joined the expedition. She was a guide to some extent, but her primary role was as translator and a gateway to the Indian tribes that they encountered. There's one more item, and that is a postcard. It was produced in 1981, 12-cent denomination. Forgot what it's called when it's a printed stamp, but it's a printed stamp on the postcard. Next slide. If you collect Lewis and Clark covers, you have hundreds and hundreds of covers with different cachets that you can collect. Here's just a small sampling. The one on the lower left is a postcard that had a cachet printed on it as a first day cover postcard, and the other are conventional covers from the release of the other stamps. I'll call your attention to the one on the lower right. That's one of the covers I'll be speaking about. It's one in my collection, and so you can glance at that and get some idea of the design of the cachet, because I'll have more to say about those a bit later on. Next is the question, who is Fred Collins? Well, he's a very prolific creator of hand-painted covers. He's made first day covers his life's work. He started his company in '78. He's been at it for 45 years. His entire family is involved in the business. And he wrote a book on the left there, which talks about his first 20 years in the business. And it's remarkable how interesting the stories of all these covers are. He has short excerpts on the covers he produced during that period, and stories about the trials and tribulations, the successes, the failures, the problems, the travel, the financing. He's got to pick topics and covers that have a chance of selling so he can make money. It's actually a fascinating subject. He's a remarkable man and entirely devoted to philately and in particular to covers. Next slide. He used to be on the National Board of Directors of the American First Day Cover Society. Anyone who's seriously into first day covers knows about that society. He co-founded the National Cachet Makers Association. And as a member of the First Day Cover Society, he was awarded the Cachet Maker of the Quarter Century, of the Half Century, of the First Decade, of the 21st Century. And he has more first place awards in their annual competition than the other Cachet Maker. The Society holds an annual competition with different categories: hand-painted covers, one-off covers, computer-generated covers, hand-drawn covers, mechanically printed covers, all different categories. And Mr. Collins has won far and away more first place awards than anyone else. He's shown on that cover, one that he did with he and his wife on it for one of the love stamps that was produced in 2007. Next slide. And here's a sampling of his covers. Or it used to be. There we go. They vary a lot, but in general, they sort of look like this. He does not do the art himself. He has a small cadre of artists that he's worked with over the years and brought along. And they contract with him to do the covers under his direction. You can go on his website, and I'll have the information about that later on. And you can purchase covers. You can also subscribe. So when some new covers are generated, you will automatically get one. And of course, you can buy them in the secondary market, eBay and so forth. They're priced from a few dollars, seldom under $5, but $5, maybe sometimes less if you buy one off, probably cheaper if you buy in quantity. And some of his covers are hundreds of dollars each because of their rarity, popularity, and so forth. But by and large, most of them are pretty affordable. Next one, Todd. This collection of mine is a tribute to a close friend of mine. This is a friend of 60 plus years, Robert Plummer of Missouri. Bob participated as a reenactor in the 200th anniversary of the Corps of Discovery. There's a wealth of information about this, the 200th anniversary. It was a remarkable undertaking. The vision of one man named Glenn Bishop. They built the keel boat, that boat shown in the middle, and two of the pirogues, which are flat bottom boats. The white pirogue on the left and the red pirogue on the right. Those are the three boats that the expedition began with, and essentially those are the boats of the expedition. My friend Bob, over a period of about 10 years, 5 times as long as the actual expedition, spent many, many months on the Missouri and Columbia rivers with his colleagues, living as they did in 1804 and presenting the history of this expedition to school children and others all along the river. Next slide.
I didn't know Ken Burns did a documentary on this.
He did. Yes, and Bob didn't. He did have a speaking part, but he was in the Ken Burns documentary, PBS documentary on the expedition, which is a wonderful piece of work. Bob portrayed the character, not character. Bob portrayed the expedition member Jean-Baptiste Deschamps, John the Baptist of the Field, also called patron, which is French for boss or foreman. Jean-Baptiste was the boss of the Red Pirogue. Bob's role was much greater than this. He was considered the second best waterman on the entire expedition and spent a lot of time captaining the keel boat. But he did anything and everything. Has 1,000,001 stories. I spent 4 days with Bob about 2 weeks ago, and we never stopped swapping stories and talking about the times we spent together. And a lot of discussion of this trip. Next slide. Just more pictures. That's Bob on the keel boat. That other photo is, I believe, from Ken Burns documentary, showing the men portaging one of the pirogues. And the bottom right is just a group. Dozens and dozens of men participated in this. And there were dozens and dozens of others of men and women behind the scenes, logistics, raising money, anything and everything, buying equipment, getting it to the right place so it was there when the ships arrived, on and on and on, 1,000 details that were handled during this 200th anniversary reenactment. Next slide. So my collection is Fred Collins covers. Collins produced 47 covers in his Lewis and Clark series. Each cover, one is shown there, has an insert that goes in it with an essay on the cover subject. Exchanged emails with Collins, and he told me he considered it the crowning achievement. It was 43-year, this is a couple of years ago, at that time, 43-year cachet making career. Here is the collection. I can't really begin to show it on the screen, but I have some examples on the next few slides, and we can talk about those. Go ahead, John. Oh, this is just an example of the insert. And then we just quickly read this one or quickly go through it. This one has Private John Collins, born in Maryland, chosen for the expedition in December 1803 because he was an expert marksman and tracker. He was designated as one of the 5 hunters, along with Coulter, the Field brothers, and George Doulard. That Coulter is John Coulter, considered America's first and foremost mountain man, and the first white man to see Yellowstone. U.S. Army riflemen at that period had hunting frocks, and they were dyed green with fringe, and Collins is shown on the cover wearing one of those as he aims at a deer. Deer was a main staple on the trip, along with elk, bear, and buffalo. About 9 pounds of meat per day per man, and using the hides for clothing, shelter, and so on. The hunters were critical to the success of the expedition. Collins was a bit of a rogue and got drunk one night at the Whiskey Cave, which was a severe breach of discipline, and was punished. But overall, he was considered an outstanding member of the Corps and someone who could always be relied on. And then Collins notes in passing, although probably not a distant relative, I'm pleased that along with Lewis and Clark traveled with Collins, which I thought was a nice touch. Next slide. Here are 8 or 10 slides. One on the left shows the Mandan tribe in South Dakota. That's where they spent their first winter, and they built Fort Mandan there, close to where the tribe lived. The next one over is Francois Labiche. What was his role? I think he was one of the hunters. I can't remember for sure. That picture shows what using what are called bull boats, which they made a frame out of willow twigs and then put buffalo hide around the frame, and they could use that to float themselves and provisions across the river if need be. Next slide. That is a chief of the Otos, which was a tribe in Iowa, modern Iowa. It was the first group of Indians that they ran into about 2 months, if I recall right, after they began. They were received warmly. They had a meeting at a place right on the river where there's a large bluff. They had their first, what they call their first Indian council. And so that is Council Bluffs, Iowa. On the right shows one of the sergeants with what are called the French voyageurs. My friend Bob Jean-Baptiste was one of the French voyageurs. He was not a military man, but they were hired for their boating, language, and survival skills. Next slide. George Doulard, the head hunter, a remarkable man. He's mentioned in the Lewis and Clark journals more times than anyone other than Lewis and Clark themselves. He was considered an absolute essential member of the Corps. He could do anything and everything. He was mild-tempered, mild-mannered, a pleasure to be around, never begrudged work. He was considered an absolutely remarkable member of the Corps. The gentlemen on the right are the three sergeants. They were the highest ranking officers after Lewis and Clark. And when Lewis and Clark were out and about talking to Indians or on field expeditions, trapping new animals or finding new flora and fauna, they controlled the camp. The one in the middle, Patrick Gauss, the oldest surviving member of the Corps. He died at age 99, in something like, I guess it was maybe about 1870. Next slide. It shows one of the members, William Tone, I think it is. He had an encounter with a bear. He shot the bear, a lung shot, but it didn't bring the bear down. Bear chased him half a mile, and he made it back to camp, and they were finally able to kill the bear. The other cover shows them going, running rapids on the Columbia. They're in a dugout boat. The Mandan Indians showed them how to make dugouts. And so I think they made 5 or 6 dugouts during the winter that they were in South Dakota. And when they gave up the keel boat and sent it back to St. Louis with part of their crew, they continued on with the pirogues, red and the white pirogue, and the dugout canoes. And that's how they made it up to the headwaters of Missouri, and then across the mountains into the Columbia River Basin. Next slide. More information. There's the website for Fred Collins, and you can learn about his covers, buy his covers, and what have you. The next organization is the Lewis and Clark Boathouse.org. In St. Charles, Missouri, right on the river, is this boathouse and museum that was built. The boats used for the 200th anniversary expedition are housed there. And there's a wonderful gift shop where you can buy videos and Ken Burns video and all kinds of things. One thing I didn't mention passing was my friend Bob published his journals of his times on the river with wonderful stories and encounters and all kinds of great happenings. That's available in that boathouse as well. And then finally, there's a Facebook group that still exists of folks who were participated in or interested in the 200th anniversary expedition, and that group continues to this day. That concludes my presentation. Those slides I showed you are, I'd say, 8 or 10, whatever I had there, 47 slides in Fred Collins' series. I have the entire collection, and every member of the expedition is shown in one or more of his slides. That concludes my presentation. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
I have always thought that it would, like I said, I have a small Lewis and Clark collection. Now I realize I have a complete Lewis and Clark collection. There really is not that many. I thought I wasn't finding them. I mean, it's such a fascinating story. I've been fascinated with this since I was like this big. It's such a fascinating story, and there's 4 stamps.
Right.
I mean, come on, that's sad. I mean, but the first day covers are probably going to get me into trouble.
Yeah, and as I showed in one of those slides, there are literally hundreds of different Lewis and Clark essays. Some just remarkably beautiful and so it's like any other philatelic rabbit hole. Once you go down, you're in deep trouble.
But why only 4 stamps? I mean, 5 if you include secondary air. I mean, why haven't we done more with this? I mean, it's such a great American story. Why haven't we done more?
Well, there's a lot of competition for stamp subjects, so.
True.
Hey, you put it close behind.
He's getting good. Bugs Bunny, I can get Lewis and Clark. Come on. There is, I don't know if you saw it, but the History Channel has done a revamped version of a documentary on the Lewis and Clark expedition. The Lewis and Clark adventure, and it's very good.
This was just recent or is it?
Just recent, a couple years ago.
Okay, I don't know that I have seen that. I'll have to look for that.
It's probably on the History Channel vault, but it's definitely worth watching. It was very well done. It's a very, in the way they've been doing all their modern documentaries, it's very blunt. So it doesn't like whitewash anything. It's like, this is what we did, this is what we didn't do, and there you go, like it or not. But it was a very well done series.
So just out of curiosity, I mean, so what's a good book about the history? I know Stephen Ambrose wrote one years ago. Is there one that you really liked, like in terms of like reading about the history of it?
Lewis and Clark?
I'm sorry, that broke up.
What is your favorite book on the Lewis and Clark I keep saying exhibition.
Expedition, yeah.
Expedition, thank you.
Well, there's a number of them, but I like, there's a number of editions of the journals themselves, and including some very, very expensive
They're a little hard to get through, but
ones
they're
which
very good.
I couldn't begin to afford. But I mean, it's been a long time since I've poked around
Okay.
seriously studying
I just remember,
but
I just remember reading Stephen Ambrose's book, I don't know how long ago. It was, I mean, 20 years ago, maybe it came out. I have no idea, but that's the one I read, and I thought it was pretty good. And I did see the Ken Burns documentary, which was fascinating, like you said. So this was a great presentation that kind of rounded all out. So thank you.
yeah, the Ambrose book is I think considered
The definitive.
kind of the definitive thing that's not a journal.
Modern history, it's a
Yeah.
journal, basically.
Yeah.
I have never seen the Ken Burns movie either. I didn't know Ken Burns did a movie on the Lewis. I mean, like I said, I've seen the modern ones, and I've read a couple. I've read the Burns book or a couple of the books, but I didn't know Ken Burns actually did a documentary on it.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna have to go looking for it when I get home.
And just as an aside, Bob, the company hired the reenactors and their boats to use in their filming. And there's a lot of stories about, it's not as smooth an operation as you might expect. Ken Burns is so famous, and his documentaries are so well funded, but there was some ill will between the film crew and the reenactors, and there's a lot of behind the scenes stories going on. So it looks amazing when you see the film, but there's a lot of gnashing of teeth and problems behind the scenes that you never hear about.
The new one from the History Channel even goes into a little bit on the yeah, there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's. I want to see the Burns one now, but it was very well done.
And you can imagine what's involved in what was involved in doing this 200th anniversary, because Lewis and Clark did it. There were no rules, you just went. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers controls the rivers. And so the boats have to have motors you're a hazard to yourself and the barges and everything else if you do. And so, and now there are dams and you have to portage. How do you portage a 55-foot keel boat? It's a big project,
Slowly.
right?
The coracle you just pop on your back. The
Right.
keel boat, no. Even the dugouts are heavy.
So they sent the keel boat back, well, they went to the Pacific. How did they themselves get back to St. Louis?
They walked. They walked and they floated. They basically followed the river back up the Columbia. And of course, once they got over the mountains and got into the Missouri River Basin, then they were going
sent-
downstream.
They
with the
sent
current.
back all their samples and all the
They sent, yes, when they
specimens and everything they were collecting, they sent
sent everything back.
back early.
Before they did the transcontinental.
Before they did that transcontinental portion, and then they brought all that stuff back that they collected in the second half with them when they made it back. One man died during the expedition. He died of what is believed to be appendicitis.
Isn't there a
Sagas-
story when they hit the Pacific?
Pardon me?
I vaguely remember something about some discord when they hit the Pacific between the.
Yeah, there was some discord. There was some debate about where they should build their winter camp. And they built it on the north side of the river, and then it wasn't working out. So in fact, there's a famous, they took a vote as to where they should put the camp. And this was the first vote in the United States where a black man and a woman voted. Clark's slave, York, was part of the expedition. Yeah, there was remarkably little discord among the members of the expedition during the expedition. Lewis and Clark were for young men. Can you imagine? Essentially 30 years old, leading this. Can't think of many 30-year-olds that I'd trust to something like that now, but at any rate,
When
my
they,
son's 35 and I don't think I'd choose him to do
they
it.
thought they were going to find dinosaurs.
I'm sorry?
They thought they were going to find dinosaurs.
Oh,
I mean, they were literally going to the moon. They had
Yeah.
no idea what they were, they thought there were still woolly mammoths and dinosaurs out there. They
Sure.
had no idea what they were walking into.
yeah.
It has fascinated me forever. That's why I was very happy to hear this. 'Cause
And Sacagawea took her child. She gave birth, I think it was during the winter layover. And that boy, who was, I think he was also Jean-Baptiste
Mhm.
Charbonneau. His nickname was Pomp. Lewis gave him the nickname Pomp or Pompey. And in fact, there's a landform, I think it's in Nebraska, called Pompey's Pillar, right on the river. And ultimately, Sacagawea sent her son to live with Clark, and Clark raised him and educated him. He had a remarkable life as well. You read about him. He did some remarkable things. He ended up in California and did all kinds of things.
His partner didn't do so well.
I'm sorry.
His partner didn't do so well.
Yeah. So anyhow, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording.